From the iShin Broadcast Studio, it's the Tool Time Podcast.
Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of the Tool Time Podcast. I'm Nadine and I'm the editor of Tech Shop.
And I'm Eric Garba, ASE Certified Master Automobile Technician.
Eric, welcome back to the studio, buddy.
Thanks, Nadine. Great to be here.
It's a new year. We got a new podcast. Joining us today is the CEO of Bartec USA, Scot Holloway, and we're just going to talk all things TPMS. I think it's a great topic and there's a lot to discuss. So you okay if we just dive right in?
I'm good with that. I love this topic, and let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right.
Scot, thanks so much again for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started. We're excited. Right. To begin, can you tell us a little bit about Bartec's history?
Sure can. Thanks for having us. We appreciate it. Bartec USA, we just celebrated our 20th anniversary, actually. We are part of the group of companies called the Bartec Group. So our headquarters is actually in the United Kingdom in a little town called Barnsley. We're located here in Sterling Heights, Michigan. We've been here the entire time. And we started out as an OE supplier. We made equipment, things like tire lines, line side programming equipment, antennas, hand tools for the OEs manufacturers, as you know, they were bringing TPMS on as part of their requirements for the mandate. So that's where we got our start. And as the automotive manufacturers started to release the technology, TPMS started to land in the marketplace, if you will. I joined the company in 2005 as product manager, and my job was to sort of bridge that gap from the OE realm, and knowing that ultimately TPMS was going to be a big part of the automotive aftermarket, develop products for that market. So it was kind of a natural progression from our first hand tool that we did way back in probably 1998 timeframe to where we are today. We've been a tool manufacturer and a supplier to the automotive aftermarket for almost 25 years now.
Very cool.
Wow, that's awesome. Very cool. I love history. That.
Yes, we always got to start off with the history.
Absolutely.
20 years is great.
Yeah, and congratulations on 20 years. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So Scot,
yep.
One of the things we think about right off the bat is TPMS sensors. And can you tell us about the types of TPMS sensors that Bartec offers?
I can. Well, sort of, building upon the history, because we like the history, for the better part of 15 years, our first 15 years, we were a tool manufacturer. So that's all we did. We made diagnostic tools. We supplied them to all of the top tire service companies, retailers in the nation. That's where we got our that's our roots, I should say. And because of that, we're very process oriented. But it became clear about 5 years ago that we needed to do more than just the tool. We planned to offer a sensor. It's now known as the Right Sensor. And, we kind of used our experience and all the things that we learned along that journey of being a tool and equipment manufacturer and put that into a sensor that not only had the best coverage and is robust, but it's got to be easy for the technicians to use. So that's probably the one thing that differs our product from the rest of the market. It's easy to use. It's designed to work within our tools. When we set out to make the sensor, we figured, we had already had experience using other programmable sensors. And the things that we noted along that journey was that if a technician was using a programmable sensor, sometimes they either programmed it incorrectly or didn't know it needed to be programmed, or something happened in the process that would cause them to have issues. So I'm going to back up just a second and say, so what we did, I'm going to explain how the TPMS service process works, to kind of end up where we did with our new technology. Whenever you replace a sensor on a vehicle, a TPMS sensor, that sensor has a unique ID. So after you've replaced that sensor, physically replaced it in the wheel, you have to program it to the car.
Right.
So they call that the relearn. That's a separate step. If you're using a programmable sensor, you've got to program that sensor to be for that application, the make, model, and year. What we did is we created a process called Right Sync for our sensor. And what it does is it takes those two separate processes and kind of blends them and makes it one. So when you go to the vehicle, you're going to the vehicle one time, you're programming the sensor and the vehicle at the same time.
Very cool.
So a lot fewer mistakes. The tool controls the whole process. So now, as long as the technician understands how the tool works and follows the instruction of the tool, I wouldn't say it's 100% impossible to make a mistake, but it's pretty close.
That's awesome. Very cool. You know, I always say you always need the right tools for the job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get it. I think ease of functionality too is super important to a lot of these techs today. So that's very cool to hear.
Absolutely.
Now, keeping on that topic of tools, what are some of your latest TPMS scan tools, and what are some of the newest features that they offer?
Well, so again, we've been doing this a long time, and our first hand tool was actually made for an automotive plant, because in those scenarios things would get broken, not functioning, and they'd have to do an offline repair. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the origin of the need for a hand tool to deal with TPMS, right? So we know that all tire shops, if you're working in a tire shop, you're dealing with TPMS, you have to have a diagnostic tool. You got to be able to check for DTCs. You got to be able to test the sensors. You got to be able to program the new sensors. Our latest generation of tools, we call it the Pro series. The Tech600Pro is our top of the line tool. And what we've built into this tool is a completely wireless function. So we actually connected the car with this. They call it a VCI, Vehicle Connection Interface. Talks to the tool via Bluetooth. So now that frees the technician to be able to walk around the car, test sensors, do everything they need to do in order to get the job done and not be tethered to the vehicle. We came up with a process right about the same time we created Right Sync, again, trying to make this very process driven and make it easy for the techs to be able to, replicate each time. Vindicate. So when we connect to the car, the tool, once paired up, interrogates the control module and figures out make, model, year automatically. So now we're not making choices and we're not looking for labels and stickers. And, if you get it wrong, one model year off has an impact on being able to communicate to the car and to program the sensor correctly, because sensors change from year to year. So getting that make, model, year just right is an important step, and we've automated that too. So it all kind of blends in with the process of the tool. The 550 Pro is sort of like the sibling of the 600 Pro. It's the same features, but instead of having this wireless connection, it's the traditional cable to the OBD connector. So those are our two main tools. We do have a what we call more of an entry level programmer / diagnostic tool. It does all the things that the other tools do. It doesn't have Wi-Fi. It doesn't have a couple of things, and because we call it an entry level tool, it's got a price point, that sort of thing. But that's pretty much our range of TPMS diagnostic tools at the moment.
That's awesome. Sounds like some great stuff, and
Absolutely.
some stuff that saves a lot of time for the technicians as well.
Time is money.
And one other thing is our tools. So they not only do they program our sensor, the Right sensor, but there are a handful of other popular programmables that we also program. Some of our competition kind of get pigeonholed into a certain brand or their brand, and we took the view that our customers may want that flexibility to do other things, so that we do that as well.
Very interesting.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So Scott, that leads me into the next question that we have. And what are some of the current challenges that technicians face with TPMS service? Well,
and this is where I think Bartec has a unique, I wouldn't say totally unique position on it, but we're pretty well dialed in. We collect data from our tools, so there's a thing called service data, so we can kind of see what's going on in our world. So imagine all of our tools are in our database, and we're seeing what's happening, what vehicles are getting worked on, which vehicles are having dead batteries, which vehicles are, seeing the highest incidence of sensor replacement, all that sort of thing. That coupled with, we probably have, I'm going to brag on our tech support team, but we got an awesome team of tech support, and they take great pride in really, helping our customers get through problems, right? So it's a mission of theirs to, if a customer calls and they can't get a vehicle figured out, we do our very well best to get it figured out. But from those two sources, we are seeing some trends. And, not to call out any specific vehicle manufacturer in a negative way, this is just what the industry is showing. But technicians, I think we're seeing lots of Toyota vehicles requiring new sensors, and new sensors means new relearns and stuff like that. So due to the volume of vehicles that are now, in that 2015 to 2016 date range, batteries are 8 or 9 years old. We're seeing that a lot of vehicles in that date range and in that particular manufacturer. Now, the Toyota relearn is a little bit different than some of the others. You walk around the car and you ping the sensors, and then you connect to the car, or already connected to the car, depending on what tool you have, program the IDs or relearn the IDs to the car. But there's an extra step that is required for those vehicles, and you actually have to activate the sensors one more time as a sort of like a check. If you don't do that in the right amount of time, the light will continue to flash. And so we're seeing a lot of that. A lot of our customers, the tool, if they pay attention to the tool, they're 9 times out of 10, they're in good shape, right? Sometimes they rush, sometimes they forget. So, what we do is we do a lot of training in that regard. And I know we're probably going to talk about training, but that's probably the number one thing from talking to tech support. And then there's another thing that keeps popping up, and it's keeping the tool current. We did a
huge topic.
We did if you were at last year's Apex show, we did a panel discussion about it, and it's according again to tech support, that's probably the number one fix to a common problem is, well, wait a minute, your tool isn't up to date and you're missing some coverage. Let's get your tool up to date, and then like that we can get the vehicle or the customer or the technician through the issues. So those are the two really at the moment things that are kind of trending in TPMS repair world.
Awesome.
Super interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And that's great to hear that about the support for technicians, because it's such an important topic,
Definitely.
important for us to be able to utilize that support.
Right, and we're definitely going to touch on that further as
Yep.
well. So one of the most recent changes we've seen in vehicle service is the importance of pre and post scan anytime a vehicle comes in for repair. How important is this idea as it relates to TPMS service?
Very important. So we saw it early on. We coined a phrase, test before you touch, a long time ago. I'm not saying we were the original, but we put it on our tool at one point. It was part of the menu flow, test before you touch, just to remind people, look, it's in your best interest to test sensors before you do any kind of tire-related work, and here's why. So the way TPMS systems work, the battery can fail on a sensor, and it's kind of tricky the way the legislation and the rules and everything were written about it, because what the auto manufacturers were concerned about is a system that was maybe too sensitive to pressure change or too sensitive to things, because it's radio signals, things interrupt radio signals. What they didn't want to have is a lot of flashing TPMS lights for no reason. So they built in, a certain amount of tolerance, if you will. So a sensor battery could die. Let's say this morning it's real cold out. Yep, that was it. The batteries are only 3 volts, so it doesn't take much once it gets to a certain point. The car, depending on the manufacturer, you may not see a flashing light for up to a week. It depends on how far you drive to work or how far you're driving back and forth, how many times the vehicle started and stopped. I mean, there's a lot of parameters. The long story short of it is every vehicle manufacturer does it a bit different, and a dead battery doesn't always show itself immediately. So I used to do a lot of the trainings back in the day where I'd get a room full of technicians, and I always asked the question, all right, so how many of you did a simple tire rotation, nothing else, you just rotated the tires, and probably didn't bother to do the relearn, because back then, they didn't understand that, and then you just let your customer go with just a rotation of tires, only to have them come back a day or two later and say, hey, my TPMS light is flashing, and you were the last one to work on my car. What happened? Well, first of all, you'd usually get 2 or 3 hands in the room say, yep, I've had that happen to me. And I said, did you check the sensors before you did any work? Nope. So probably what had happened in most cases is the sensor was already dead. Car hadn't shown it as a fault yet. And all you did was rotate the tires, which had nothing to do with any of that. Had they tested the sensors prior to doing anything, they would have found that they had a bad sensor, bad battery. And we're going to touch on that a little bit later, because that's an important step. That's to understand, the condition of the vehicle before you start breaking into it, because what's going to happen is your customer is going to come back, complain, you're going to do something to make it right because that's your customer, and chances are you're going to eat a sensor. So eat the cost of a sensor, I should say.
Yeah.
So
nobody wants to do that, that's for sure.
Right. So inspect, right? Always test before you touch. And then on the flip side of that, when you've done all the work and you've replaced sensors, you've reprogrammed the vehicle, and in some cases, like we have the feature to change what's known as recommended inflation pressure or placard. So every vehicle, the way the TPMS works is on your door jamb, there's that sticker, the tire placard, and it tells you the size of tires and the recommended inflation pressure. Well, that number is what drives the TPMS. So, if it's 50 PSI, and the way the TPMS works is when it falls 25% below that number, you're going to get a light. Well, sometimes in trucks and SUVs, customers like to plus size, or maybe even the plus size or upfit, where they're putting, maybe it's a truck and they had a passenger car tire, but they wanted to put a 10-ply. Well, 10-ply tire requires more pressure to keep it at load carry capacity, but your TPMS still thinks it's 35 PSI when the tire is at 50. So you got to recalibrate that, and our tool does that. And I say all that so you do that at the end, and you print that out, and you can put it in with the rest of their paperwork as, here's your post-inspection. Here's what we did. All your sensors work. Your placard's this. Everything works the way it's supposed to. You have a date stamp. So whoever works on your vehicle next, they could, that helps. It sets that's sort of a baseline.
Presented from the Ishin Broadcast Studio at Babcock's Media.
That's awesome. Boy, there's a lot more than meets the eye when it comes to TPMS, right?
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool stuff.
Learning a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love it.
There's something else, Nadine. Did you know that like 100 years ago, and I'm sure Scott's probably seen this, somebody invented a tire pressure warning device. It's kind of affixed to the wheel somehow. And when the tire would get low on pressure, it would actually hit this device and make kind of a clicking noise, or like a dinging noise, or a little bit of a jingle.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's actually very, very true. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little mechanical device.
Right.
And do you know that's where the original idea for jingle bells came from?
No way.
No, that's that part I made up.
This guy, get out of here.
You had me.
But the tool is real. I'm trying to find one. I think it'd be really cool to find one of those. So anyhow, so Scott, on your website, you feature 6 steps to TPMS success. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, because again, we spent a lot of time helping our customers, right? And we tried to come up with, call it a basic roadmap or standard operating procedure, but just to kind of, because remember, we go all the way back to the beginning, right? When, if you rewind 20 years ago, what was the most technical thing in your average tire shop? Probably the balancer, right? That was computer controlled. Most tire shops weren't connecting to the car via OBD and doing any sort of diagnostics. So TPMS changed that whole environment pretty quickly for tire stores. So we kind of put out a game plan. What do you need to do to get into the TPMS business? You got to decide on what kind of sensors you want to use. There's programmable. There's a part for part, they call it, which is based on like the OE. It's either an OE or an OE equivalent. And then there's what's known as multi-protocol, or sensors that are already kind of like queued up with a range of vehicles in it. And then when you install it, the vehicle knows which one is in the sensor. Programmable sensors offer the most flexibility, right? So in our case, we got one part that covers, we're approaching 99.5%. So if you go for part, you're going to have to stock on average, 100 to 130 different SKUs to make it work. Whereas a programmable, you get it down to one. So, that's sort of your first step. What's best for your business? Then you got to have tools, diagnostic tools. How do I know the vehicle's working? What am I, if I'm doing programmable sensors, I got to have a tool that can do that. Always stock the wear items. So sensors some have rubber valve stems, and some have these aluminum valve stems. So one of the best ways to make sure you get the most life out of a sensor with the aluminum valve stem is whenever you change the tire, you replace the wear items. There's seals and cores and bits that wear out or oxidize or just flat out corrode. And you have these kits we call them kits of bits, but these little service kits that you keep in stock that you can service the sensor with. So changing out, just like back in the old days before TPMS, they would always cut off the rubber valve stem and put a fresh one in there for the same reason. The rubber decays and degrades and it's prone to leak. So service the sensors with the wear items. And then those wear items all have different, there's a nut, there's a torque spec for everything. So you got to have sort of special tools. So have those service tools ready to be able to mount those and fasten those fasteners. And then, this is kind of, this is the plug, right? Align yourself with a supplier, somebody like us or others that are there committed to supporting your investment in the tools and all that that can help you, that provide tech support and that sort of thing. And then kind of use your data. So you got information coming from your supplier, from your customers, from your point of sale, whatever it is, and to make better decisions relative to TPMS. Like I was talking about earlier, there's trends. We're seeing real trends of the cars that were made, the most popular vehicles that were made back in 2015 and 16. They're at the top of the chart right now for sensor replacement. So, knowing that, you can better plan, do things like on our side, what we're doing, we're creating more video content to help our technicians work on those vehicles.
Awesome. Very cool. So it's all about being prepared and having the right tools,
exactly,
the right equipment, and the right parts and components in stock.
I love that. Kits of bits. Very
that's
rolls off
awesome.
the tongue perfectly.
It does. Yeah.
Well, remember, we're a British company, so that that's kind of a British thing, right? Kits for bits.
Nice.
Yeah, it does sound like that now that you mention it.
Now, Scott, can you tell us about the make Inoperative provision of the Motor Vehicle Safety Act?
Yeah. So way back when, and I say way back when, almost 14 years ago now, the Tire Industry Association, they were always really ahead of all of this in terms of, they're an industry support organization, and they got out in front of it because they were hearing from tire service providers, what do we do with this? We got customers that come in with the systems aren't working, they don't want to pay for parts, they don't want all this going on, right? So they kind of created these 4 scenarios. So in these 4 scenarios, what as a tire installer am I supposed to do, or can I get away with or not do, that sort of thing. So they wrote a letter, posed it to NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and what can I do and what can't do. So scenario 1, the TPMS system. So a customer comes in, is inoperative, not working prior to it showing up in my shop. If the sensor was broken or non-functional when the customer arrived, does that repair facility have to repair or replace the sensor? NHTSA said, no, it's already broke. You don't. It's already inoperative. You don't have to. That being said, back to what we were talking about earlier, test before you touch. You better make sure you inspect and make sure you explain all that to the consumer, because if you don't do that, you open yourself up to owning the issue, and really costing you money, right? And with each of these, as you'll see as we go through them, the best practice is if it's not working, make it work. That it's a safety system,
Absolutely.
right? They were just trying to parse scenarios so that companies could react. This one's probably more popular now than it was back then. Customer comes in and they purchase an alternate set of wheels, whether it's for the winter or they want to modify their car. So they buy the set of wheels and tires, but they don't want to pay for sensors. So assuming that the TPMS was functional prior to that whole thing happening, you did your inspection, NHTSA said there is a requirement to make sure the TPMS remains operative or operational. So then now as a service provider, you've got some choices. Convince them to buy sensors and explain to them why. Because, well, first of all, and we talk about this all the time with front counter people, it was a safety system. You've already paid for it. When you bought the car, you paid extra to have TPMS. Why wouldn't you keep it going, right? But either you convince them to buy sensors, or you take the sensors off the old wheels and put them on the new ones and that sort of thing. Or, obviously you could not do the work. So you want to, the NHTSA said, yes, you have to make it operational one way or the other. Then there's the one that was probably more common in the early days for sure. So the technician broke a sensor by accident. Something happened either in mounting or dismounting, or, what used to happen too is a lot of these sensors in particular climates like, where we are here in Detroit, where they use salt on the roads and in the winter, that salt would, corrode these sensors. They may be corroded on the inside, but if you don't know that, or if you don't inspect them, or you don't look at it, and then you go to remove it and it breaks off because it's corroded, now what, right? So that was, inadvertently is what they were focused on. So the technician, broke a sensor. Yes, the repair facility must replace that sensor and keep the system functioning the way it was supposed to. And the last one kind of also ties into inspection. Service provider releases the vehicle after the work's been done. Lights off. Tech wasn't aware of anything that was damaged or faulty. NHTSA says no, there's no requirement there either. But this one could be tricky again if you're not doing the proper inspection pre and post and informing the consumer what it is that's happening. So there's kind of a couple of common threads here. A, make sure you've got the proper tools to do the inspection. This supports what we talked about earlier, because each one of these relies on knowing for sure one way or the other the system is working the way it's supposed to. And, and really work on this is the front counter we call it talking TPMS, educating the consumer on even the service kits. The last thing, and I'm a kind of a car guy. And when you buy tires for your car, for the first 2 weeks, every time you walk out of your car, what do? You look back because the tires look cool, everything, the last thing you want to have happen is, you come out the next morning after getting new tires because you didn't want to spend the money on the service kit. Now you got a flat tire because the sensor leaked. Mm-hmm. Who wants that?
Absolutely no one.
Right. So that's where, that's sort of the art of the talking TPMS with the consumer. And we work on that a lot. When our field service reps go into the stores with our customers, they focus a lot on that.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that make and operative provision, that's really an interesting topic,
For sure.
And it's I'm sure a lot of shops still have questions about it. So it's thanks for going over that with us, Scott.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting how when you start talking about the make and operative provision, how it ties together and everything that we've talked about already.
Yes.
So yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And it kind of leads in, you touched a little bit on this, Scott, already about how important it is, and that was our next question, is how important is it for shops to educate consumers about TPMS, and how much time did you spend doing this as a shop owner or a service writer or a representative?
It's probably the most important thing as it relates to this category. I mean, take your largest tire stores. They've been doing it a long time. So they tend to handle it pretty well. But I would say across the board, it's still, well, let's go, if you look at some of the surveys that have been done about TPMS, they've been published. I'm not going to cite who they are, but I know I read something here not too long ago where 1 in 10 ignore the light altogether. So if that light comes on solid, you got a low tire pressure, 10% of the people on the road don't even pay attention to that.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And a third, and somewhere, again, according to what is being cited, is a third to half of the drivers still don't know what the light even means.
Wow.
So there's your takeaway. If you're, you're in the tire business, you got to be able to explain what it is to a customer. Because again, it's a safety item. You need this thing to be functional.
Super
Absolutely.
important when it comes down to safety alone. That should be a number one reason why these techs take the time to educate their customers, and why it's so important to make sure that that's where it needs to be.
Absolutely.
So, Scott, to wrap things up, what type of TPMS training and support does Bartec specifically offer to professional technicians?
Well, we got a lot of things going on. We developed about 4 years ago. We call it our field service team. So we've got a number of people. If you go to our website and you go to our contacts page, you can see where they're located all around the country, and they all work for Bartec. They're our people, and their sole job is to go into our customers and make sure their tools are up to date, make sure if there's any questions, give them the tips and the tricks, how to get things done. We talk about the top 5 vehicles that everybody's seeing. So we provide on-site support.
That's awesome.
And then our tech support team. That's an extension of our training program, because all day long, every day, they're helping customers, technicians, figure this stuff out. And then sort of to fill in the gaps, we got video content. That's an ever expanding library. We're always working on videos. That's why we have this background here. We're doing a lot of training videos, with live people. We're actually working on new content more aimed at the social media sort of format to get information out there. Yeah, so we're doing all of that. If you go to our website, we're building an FAQ. So when you log into our website or visit our website, there's an AI chatbot launches, and you can, if our tech support isn't there answering the question live, you can go in and say, all right, I got this vehicle, and then we'll send you either a TSB or a link or some kind of help when tech support isn't available.
Wow, very
so
cool.
Yeah, we try to cover all the bases, and it's it got to keep going with it.
Absolutely.
Well,
Great
you guys
stuff.
are absolutely killing it in terms of all things TPMS, Scott. I'm honestly blown away. Thank you so much for everything that you shared with us today.
Absolutely.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. This is the one thing I like to talk about almost as much as I like playing golf.
I love it. I love it.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank
Absolutely.
you again, Scott. We
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wow, very cool, Eric. What do you think?
That was fantastic. I mean, Scott is a wealth of information, and there's always so much about TPMS that we just forget about.
I honestly don't think we could have picked a better person to talk TPMS with today. Scott covered a lot for us. And it's fantastic to hear, how involved Bartec is as well with their technicians. So
absolutely, because we need that support from these companies to be successful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Eric, thank you so much again for joining me. And to our audience, really quickly, we'd like to share to any equipment, tool, or supply companies that are looking to get their message out on the podcast. In the video description, I'm going to be sharing my email as well as Eric's. Shoot us an email and we'll see what we can do on getting you on the podcast to discuss your mission and values. Everyone, thanks again for watching, and we'll be sure to see you again next time on the next episode.